Good afternoon, everyone. I think we are ready to start. Yes, perfect. Everyone who should be with us, it's with us, so we can go ahead and begin the meeting. First of all, apologies for the slight delay, but good afternoon and welcome to this very timely discussion at the European Parliament. My name is Madalina Iamandei. I'm a public affairs expert. I am based in Brussels. I'm sitting currently with DGA Group, but also I am the chairwoman of the Patient Council for FH Europe. First, let me warmly thank our co-hosts today, MEP Romana Jerkovic and MEP Tomislav Sokol, for having us today. Without their leadership and commitment, today's discussion would not be possible. We are also grateful to all of you joining us here in person, but also online. This discussion is gonna explore the personal, the economic, but also the policy dimension of cardiovascular health, and especially prevention. This event takes place in the aftermath of the FH Awareness Day, which was marked yesterday, but also in anticipation of the World Heart Day, which we are marking next week on 29th of September. Equally important, this discussion comes at a time when the European Commission is drafting a European plan for cardiovascular health, for which FH Europe has already submitted a call for evidence response. So very, very auspicious timing. I think I hear myself in the other corner of the room, but that's fine. To set the stage for this discussion, I would like to invite you to look back at where this journey began with a short video from 2015. It shows how early advocates were already calling attention to the inherited lipid disorders, and why the fight for recognition and policy change has been a decade in the making. Do we have the video? Not yet. Exactly. We can perhaps move to the next part of the event, and we can come back to that if the tech part would be with us, with the tech gods, as we call them here. In that case, it is my honor now to welcome MEP Romana Jerkovic. She will reflect on why cardiovascular health must be framed as a European priority.
Thank you, Madalina. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, patient advocates, experts, and guests. It's my great honor to open today's event in the European Parliament. I would like to begin to sincerely thank to FH Europe Foundation for bringing us together. And I also want to thank the patients, the families, and advocates who will share their stories with us. Without your courage and without your voice, we wouldn't be here. So welcome and thank you all for coming. For me, this is far more than just another policy debate. You know, this is about lives, about real people facing illness and all the challenges that come with it. It is an urgent call that we cannot afford ourselves to overlook, because cardiovascular disease remain the leading cause of death in Europe, accounting for nearly 1 in every 3 deaths across the Union. I am deeply aware of the profound impact cardiovascular disease has on families and communities. This is not just a medical challenge, it is also political and social. Moreover, it costs our economies around 282 billion euro every year. And this is not sustainable. And this is also avoidable, which is important. As a member of the Parliament, I'm also aware of the persistent health inequalities across our union, where too often access to prevention and chances of survival depend on the place where someone lives, which is not fair. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind, not the children who deserve to grow up healthy, nor their caregivers whose essential contribution is so often overlooked, nor those living with rare conditions like homozygous familiar hypercholesterolemia. I knew I will have a problem with this word. It's too long.
I had to practice many, many times as
Yeah.
well.
Thank you. However, today is not just about confronting these obstacles. It is about embracing a remarkable opportunity. If we are bold enough to change the way we think about prevention, early detection, and investment in health, then this challenge could be transformed into opportunity, an opportunity to save lives, to relieve healthcare systems, and to make Europe more competitive on the global stage. When we speak about competitiveness in Europe, we often think about digitalization, green transition, industrial policy, but let me ask, what can be more strategic than the health of our people? Without healthy citizens, there is no productive workforce. Without healthy children, there is no competitive next generation. Without healthy societies, there is no resilient Europe. That is why we must make cardiovascular health a European priority, just as climate policy, industrial strategy, or digital innovation. Because if we are being honest, it is a foundation for all of them. If Europe is to lead in the world, we must lead in health. And leading in health means not only treating diseases once they appear, but preventing them before they start. One of the clearest opportunities lies in inherited lipid disorders such as familiar hypercholesterolemia, a silent genetic condition that does not announce itself with early symptoms. Screening and early detection are crucial because lipid disorders are preventable, they are manageable, they are treatable, and yet today only 1 in 10 people living with FH are identified, and this is not acceptable. We cannot afford to lose another decade, or another year, or another life, or another heart. With screening, with early diagnosis, and with the therapies we already have, we can save lives. And honestly, here we have a real political opportunity. It is up to us, European leadership, to prove what prevention truly means. The chance to stop cardiovascular disease before it begins. Every euro spent on early detection of FH or Lp(a) saves money in avoided hospitalizations, surgeries, and lifelong therapies for advanced heart disease. Screening programs are cost-effective investments, not burdens. But most importantly, the return on this investment is measured not only in money, not only euros. It is measured in years of life gained, in families kept whole, in children given the future they deserve. Let me put it simply, investment in health is investment in competitiveness. A workforce free from the burden of chronic cardiovascular disease is a workforce that can innovate, that can create, and that can give the future that our children deserve. Let me put it simply, investment in health is investment also in competitiveness, a workforce which is, as I said before, free of the burden of the disease is something that can give so important stimulus to the European society. My country, Croatia, has already shown that this vision can be turned into reality. We have implemented pediatric screening for familiar hypercholesterolemia demonstrating that with the political will and the right tools, prevention can move from aspiration to the practice. And this is a model for Europe. This is a proof that progress is possible when commitment meets action. Europe is also showing leadership through research and innovation. EU co-founding the so important projects such as Perfecto or PerMed FH and FH Early and early delivering concrete solutions, meaning genetic platforms, which can improve diagnosis or biomarkers for more targeted prevention, explainable artificial intelligence to support healthcare professionals, and the new communication models to overcome behavioral and social barriers. What makes this initiative especially powerful is that they are being co-created with the patients. And this is not science for the few, it is innovation with and for the people who need it most. Finally, funding and research. The Parliament will fight hard in order to increase the funding in the upcoming negotiations, but it is now clear that the new MFF will for sure not have a dedicated health budget as we were used to. It will be tied to projects and programs, what means that we have to work hard and be very creative in order to prioritize grants for cardiovascular diseases and prevention and early detection and treatment innovation. As a rapporteur for the upcoming cardiovascular health plan for Europe, I commit to work with all of you, patient organizations and scientists and healthcare professionals, industry and member states to turn this vision into reality. I will continue to advocate tirelessly for people with inherited lipid disorders for a brighter and healthier future where early screening and equitable care are the norm, and where cardiovascular disease is no longer Europe's silent killer, but a preventable condition of the past. So in the next few minutes, you will hear from young advocates and caregivers whose lives have been shaped by late diagnosis. Their courage reminds us where we are here. And so when we speak about policy, let us never forget the people. Their testimonies are more powerful than any speech we deliver. They are the reason we must act with urgency and with courage. They are the reason I want the cardiovascular health report to be a game changer that will deliver on its promise to save lives. So, dear colleagues and friends, I know that we have a knowledge and that we have tools to turn tide against cardiovascular diseases, but it will require a bold leadership, unwavering commitment, and a shared vision for a healthier Europe. So let us commit here and now to translate words into action, into deeds, promises into policies, and intentions into impact. Because every day we wait is a day lost for millions of Europeans whose lives depend on prevention, early diagnosis, and the fair and equal access to care. I believe that together we can build a future where no child's life is cut short because of a silent condition, where no family is shattered by preventable heart disease, and where every citizen, regardless of their country, has the chance to live a full and healthy life. And this is our moment, I would say. This is our moment to act, to lead, to save lives, and the choice is ours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, MEP Jerkovic, for your commitment. That's something that sits well, I think, with the people in this room, and for your leadership as well on cardiovascular prevention. And we do take the invitation for us as advocates to work close to you to make sure that lipid disorders, inherited lipid disorders, are a priority in Europe. Thank you. And I think now we do have the video, and MEP Jerkovic also mentioned that shared vision, which is 10 years in the making, quite literally. So let's watch the video.
I would propose that we maybe
Yes, the gods are not here yet for technology, so we will have to go analog once more, but that's perfect because the next part of our agenda today, it's actually hearing from patients, from advocates, from carers, and their stories should stay at the center of any discussion when it comes to policymaking. As FH Europe underlined in its response to the European Commission call for evidence for the upcoming European plan for cardiovascular health, around 1 in 300 Europeans live with FH and 1 in 5 with elevated Lp(a), but most are undiagnosed. Behind these numbers are real lives that are cut short by premature heart attacks and strokes. To remind us what is at stake, we will now hear directly from young advocates and caregivers. I have with me Lena Rosa Hanauer, coming from Austria, Joanna Kacprzak from Poland, Aidan Kahl from the Netherlands, and also Tevi Pobus from Estonia. Thank you. Lena Rosa, I will start with you. Your mother was one of the pioneers of patient advocacy in Austria 10 years ago. You are now carrying her torch, but you are also pursuing science yourself. Can you share your story, what early screening meant to you, and how your family's experience shows both sides of what is at stake?
Yes, sure. So my name is Lena Rosa. I'm in my early 20s and I'm from Austria. And like already said, people like my mother were pioneers in FH patient advocacy here in this parliament 10 years ago. And she was talking out of fear for her child who had FH and was diagnosed, and founded a patient organization, not only raising awareness for myself, but also for thousands of people in Austria. Now I'm here in this room 10 years later, talking, not only advocating as a patient, but also as an advocate. And also as a woman whose life got saved because of an early diagnosis. And here's my story. So my father was suffering a heart attack with 30 years old, and not because he did poor lifestyle choices, but because he wasn't diagnosed early in life. And I was. And that's the difference between us. His diagnosis came late and mine came early in life. And I was diagnosed with 2 years old, and first-line therapies followed soon after. And cascade screening revealed that I inherited heterozygous FH. And yeah, it's a genetic disease that rises your cholesterol levels from birth on. And because of an early interventions, I can now live a happy, fulfilling, healthy life with studies and travels. And yes, but here's the question. Why did my father had to suffer in the first place in order for me to have a happy life? Here's the reason. I was lucky. And I know for a fact that not everybody is as lucky as I am. Like, Sorry. I know that I'm advocating here not only for myself, but also for thousands of people here in this room, whether they're sitting next to me here today or all around the world who don't know that this condition is silently putting them at risk. My father's disease could have been prevented. It could have been avoided. And early diagnosis should not depend on tragedy, and it should not depend on luck. Cascade screening works, and children's life could be saved in their future. And I'm a living proof of that. I'm also pursuing a career in genetics and working at the National Institute of Health with Professor Mafalda Babon, who you will also later hear in this meeting. And one thing I've learned is that not every FH patient is the same. And we all have different genetic mutations. And we all respond different to treatment as well. And that's why precision medicine and personal care is super important. So my message is pretty simple. No child has to wait for her father's heart attack in order to know their risk. We have the tools and we know what works. So there needs to be organized and systematic implementation all across Europe. And behind every statistic, there's just a child like I was, having the hopes for dreams and for a future free from preventable disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena Rosa, for your very emotional story. I resonated a lot with what you've said, and you will see throughout this this day and this discussion how this community is very close and very tightly knitted. There will be references all over the place, so do keep an eye on that. Aidan, moving on to you, you've described your story as unusual and even lucky. You were diagnosed young, but not with FH, rather something else. Can you perhaps tell us how cascade, but also reverse cascade screening shaped your family's journey, and what lessons you carry forward from your doctor's 5 golden rules?
Will do so. First of all, I'd like to start. Thank you, members of Parliament, colleagues and friends. As a medical student, I usually study case histories. Today, I am one. My story begins long before I was born. My great-grandmother on my father's side had yellowish patches around her eyes. We call that Santa Lasmata, and it's a visible sign of high cholesterol. Because of that, she became one of the very first people in the Netherlands to be tested for familial hypercholesterolemia, an inherited lipid disorder. She passed it on to my grandfather, who was told not to be able to live to see 50. He's now 78, still healthy, even still does volunteer work, and has never had cardiovascular disease, all as a result of early testing, treatment, and management. My father also inherited FH and lives a healthy, active life too. So when I was very young, cascade pediatric testing was offered to me, but the results were quite surprising. I did not have FH, which affects about 1 in 300 people. But I did have elevated lipoprotein A, which is another inherited lipid disorder that affects 1 in 5. In other words, I escaped one genetic lottery only to win another. Now, from there, reverse cascade screening revealed that my mother also carried elevated Lp(a). And suddenly our family history started to make sense. The premature heart attack that took my grandfather on my mother's side at 54 was no longer bad luck. Now, it was part of a family pattern of cardiovascular disease. For me, being diagnosed young was not a burden. In fact, I would say it was a benefit. I learned how to live with it quite early. And Professor Albert Wickman, who you will also be hearing here later on, gave me the 5 golden rules as a child. They're the following. Eat your vegetables, take your medicine, exercise regularly, never smoke, and most important, always look left and right before crossing the road. Simple advice, but it gave me both direction and resilience. My condition is not a shadow over my life. It is a framework for my personal health. Today, I'm a medical student, aiming to specialize in vascular medicine and lipidology. That means something very important. I see both worlds. I see the world of the lived experience, and I see the world of the clinic. And I also see the gaps. Families were never offered testing despite very clear family history. Young people left without support to handle the mental weight of lifelong risk, and promising research on new therapies that rarely reaches those who need hope the most. These are the gaps that we must close, and we must do that together. That is why patient involvement and true ambassadorship matters so deeply. And in my role as a patient ambassador with the FH Europe Foundation, I see every day how teamwork and collaboration between professionals and patients can turn these gaps into bridges. In the Netherlands, I was quite lucky. Lucky that FH screening was already in place. Lucky that a pediatrician thought to add Lp(a) to my test. Lucky that my family was guided and supported. But this kind of luck should not be a lottery. It should be the standard across Europe. Because early testing is not just about protecting individuals. It prevents suffering across families, across generations. It keeps people healthier for longer, able to work, to study, to contribute. It also means fewer hospitalizations, fewer cardiovascular events, even fewer costs for health systems. Now, this session is called Next Generation. I sit here as part of that next generation, a young person living with elevated Lp(a) and a future doctor. My story shows what is possible when screening is in place. Now, imagine if this were true for every family in Europe. So my message is quite simple. Systematic testing for FH and elevated Lp(a) must be a cornerstone of the European Cardiovascular Health Plan. Because early detection not only saves lives, it saves futures across entire generations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aidan, for your storytelling skills and for sharing your story with us. I will go a bit of script here because whoever knows me knows that I love reading, and this story took me right to The Convenient of Water, which is a fantastic book. I recommend it to everyone, but it starts with a curse in the family. So the people, the men in the family would drown without a reason. However, through science, through studying medicine in the family, they kind of come to understand that it's not bad luck. It's not a curse. It's something beyond that. I don't want to give, the plot away here. But this is where your story took me. So thank you so much for sharing. We are now moving to Poland and to Joanna. Your story begins in the mountains, where your sister tragically lost her life to a heart attack, and this happened before you were even born. HoFH, it's a rare and severe form of FH. So can you tell us how and what your life looked like growing up with a diagnosis like this, and how access to therapy, but also to community, changed your outlook?
Yes, recently I was hiking in the mountains and I realized that trauma from the past is still present in my life. Yes, exactly. I have HoFH and I was diagnosed right after I was born. Doctors suspected it is a genetic condition, and it happened because my sister had died of a heart attack at the age of 13. She died before I was born, and I never had a chance to meet her. And her loss was the shadow on my family under which my life began. And growing up with this condition has been extremely difficult. For most of my life, I felt completely alone because in my country there was little information, no community, no access to innovative therapies, and I lived with a constant knowledge that my condition was life-threatening, that my future might be cut short. The isolation, strict diet, medications, the despair, the lack of hope, it was all overwhelming. In recent years, things began to change. In Poland, I was finally able to access novel therapy for HoFH. For the first time, I could see a different kind of future for myself. Then I discovered the patient community, FH Europe, and I learned that I was not alone, that others shared the same journey, that support and solidarity existed. I learned that therapies already existed in other countries, and it could transform my life completely much earlier. Access should not depend on where you are born. It should not be a lottery. Today, I work in arts and culture sector. I hike the mountains without the fear that I could die in there like my sister did. And for the first time, I am allowing myself to think about the possibility to become a mother. That is how much has changed from despair to hope, from isolation to community. But this transformation must be available for everyone, not just the lucky few. So my message is this: therapies exist, support exists, communities exist, but unless access is guaranteed, people like me will continue to suffer needlessly. No one should have to grow up believing they are alone with a fatal condition, and no one should lose a sister, a brother, a daughter to a disease we can prevent and treat. We must act to make sure my story is no longer repeated in Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. I think the words that stuck with me from your intervention the most, it's a life regained, and you do have hope. You can plan ahead, and you can make whatever you want out of your life. You do not have that many limitations as your sister did, and unfortunately, yeah, it's a story that it's very wholesome, I think. From one end to another. Moving on to Tevi, finally, you are a mother and caregiver of Elisette, the only child diagnosed with FCS in Estonia. Your experience shows what it means when a rare disease makes families invisible. Can you tell us about your daily reality and what it means to be both a mother and a full-time carer?
Yeah, hi. Our story is so much different from others because we had no warning, no family history. And just one day, my daughter got diagnosed with familial chylomicronemia syndrome, FCS. And she's not just the only child in Estonia with FCS. She's the only patient person, human being with FCS in Estonia. It's very rare and dangerous inherited lipid disorder, and without proper care, it can lead to life-threatening pancreatitis. And how do you know how to care for her properly if you don't have any info? We don't have any experts, no patient organizations, no support. But she was lucky in some ways. It's very common for FCS patients to be diagnosed after years or even decades of suffering, pain, accusations of alcoholism, drug seeking, even organ removals. Luckily, she didn't have to face that. But yeah, no information for us there, so I had to seek that from abroad. Finally, I met others. For example, FH Europe organization. We met others. It meant us a lot. Meeting someone who understands us, getting reliable information about treatments, managing condition. And living with FCS means everyday struggle. You have to plan and calculate everything, even simple visits to family members, to zoo, school lunches in kindergarten. All these are complicated. And her diet needs to be restricted it's 5 grams per day. It's only 1 egg a day. And I need to check every label because there are so much mistakes there because of translations or just typos, but it matters to us. And it doesn't just affect her, it affects us all, our whole family. Sorry? I have lost my job, my health, mental and physical. So I just want to say, rare counts also. We need your attention, your support. Don't forget us. Thanks.
Debbie, it's really hard to find words after your intervention, and I think this testimony of yours brings again the attention of the burden that carers do have in their daily lives and the losses that they have to suffer on a daily basis. And in a way, I do recognize myself in many of your stories as a patient myself, but also through the loss and through the caregiving, since I was the caregiver for my father as well for many years. And I cannot help but wonder what if we had the same system in Romania as in the Netherlands, because you, Aidan, spoke so well about how seamless it almost is to screen, to find a diagnosis. Unfortunately, that was not at all the case for my father. His diagnosis came very, very late. It came at a point when he already had a heart attack, when coronary issues were very, very ample, when atherosclerosis was so advanced that the only option left for him was an amputation of both legs. He was left in a wheelchair. And after all these, basic treatment for FH was still not part of his routine, from his care routine for, I don't know, 3-4 years in his late years. And that comes to, that realization came after actually I looked through his medical letters. And on the medical letters, all these cardiovascular issues were up and front primary cause of diseases and of health issues, when in fact it was FH that was not diagnosed on time. That was the secondary health issue, a secondary diagnosis. And for me, that is mind-blowing, even at this stage, that the connection was not made in time. I had my diagnosis here in Belgium, and I got it at the beginning of this year. My dad went through this 7 years ago. So, you know, the connections were not made, and I'm thinking how maybe digitalization would have helped, maybe awareness, maybe referrals from GPs to specialist care. There are so many points in this patient journey that are simply missing, that I'm still trying to process everything and to make sense of it all. So thank you so much for your courage and for your testimonies here. I think this is the central piece of our discussion, and any policy making decisions should take into account the lived experience as well as the science and the innovations that we benefit of today. And with that, I do like to welcome also MEP Sokol. Thank you very much for joining. Maybe it's a good hard transition, but a necessary one towards you and the work in the Parliament, because I do have faith in the European Parliament as a vehicle for improving our lives as patients, for supporting us in our advocacy efforts, and in the end, bringing innovation closer to us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I will have to apologize because I will have to leave pretty soon. But there's justified reasons I have to speak at HERA, so also on health topics about health preparedness. So that's the reason. But I'm glad that you called me to say something about what we can actually do on European level. But first, I would like to congratulate the host, our colleague Romana Jerkovic, because she has been appointed as the Parliament's rapporteur for cardiovascular health plans. So definitely, we have a very strong advocate who will be working precisely on these issues. And me, of course, also as the coordinator of the EPP, of the European People's Party, I will also do my part from that side also to make this plan as good as possible, especially for the patients. I think that's important. When we speak about cardiovascular and prevention, unfortunately, the focus is always on the usual suspects, which are of course important. That's lifestyle, that's smoking, that's alcohol, etc. And all these things are important, but because of so much focus on that and so much political sensitivity of this, different lobbies, interest groups, different countries, countries from Southern Europe are very sensitive about wine production, some others about tobacco, alternatives to tobacco, etc. So the things which actually are not the result of lifestyle, but are just inherited. So these things are not mentioned that often, and screening in that sense is not mentioned that often. But this has changed. So now we have this different focus. Now we have the advocacy of all of you, which is very important, which definitely shows what kind of an importance this is and why this should also have a prominent role when we speak about prevention of cardiovascular disease, not just the question of lifestyle. And cardiovascular disease are the main killer still in the European Union. So they cause almost 2 million deaths every year. And this is why we have to prioritize them. So since we have Europe's beating cancer plan, and cancer is number 2 killer in Europe, obviously it's logical that we also have cardiovascular plan to address the number one killer. And for me personally, this was something that we advocated already in the previous mandate before elections, and we put it in our electoral manifesto as well, that we need to have a cardiovascular plan. So why to have a separate cardiovascular plan? I hear a lot about we need separate strategy, don't need separate strategies, health in all policies, etc. That's all very good. But trust me, if you want something to be, a priority, that's something to be discussed, to be in the focus, then you need to have it as a special priority. And especially for politicians. And this strategy is important because it can use the beating cancer plan as a blueprint. That means that you have concrete objectives, concrete measures, concrete benchmarks, so how to measure the actual result, and the most important thing is funding. So to have a separate document with a lot of visibility, with concrete commitment on funding. And the European Commission, for instance, committed to 4 billion euros funding for cancer in Europe's beating cancer plan. And that definitely changed things and really pushed things to improve. So this is why having this kind of a plan is so important. This is why we push so strongly for that. And I think in that sense, European Union can play a role. Of course, unfortunately, a lot of these things that have already been mentioned are national competence. That's our main obstacle. That member states define their health policies, what they will fund, how they will organize their healthcare systems, what they will promote, etc. But you can help. You can provide support. And if we create, for instance, a concrete target, a certain number of people who undergo screening within 5-year time, for instance. And if the European Union then also provides financial support to member states, concrete guidances which are not legally binding, but if the European Union puts pressure on the member states with concrete objectives, then we can really make a difference. And I think this is why this plan is so important. Of course, when you speak about this, as I said, the visibility has risen. So we have the Prague Declaration, the Brussels International Declaration, Council conclusions from December 2024. So we already have this momentum, but now it's important to use this strategy that to actually include it in something which is stronger and with concrete commitments and concrete money. A good thing, what we heard from the Commission is that they are speeding up the process. So the first plan was to have the cardiovascular plan in 2026, but now from what we are hearing, the plan is to already have it by the end of this year. And if they do it in the right way, that can really make a difference and that can really help. So definitely, and in that sense, so screening for FH definitely should find a prominent place there. One thing that is the main danger that I see now is the EU next 7-year budget, and this 7-year budget, the proposal that was rolled out by the Commission, definitely tells us a different story than everything that I mentioned up until now. When I said that health needs to be a priority, that we need a cardiovascular plan, concrete funding, concrete objectives, etc. But the budgetary proposal tells a different story, because unfortunately in this proposal of the budget by the Commission, we don't have a separate health program anymore. And I think that's wrong. I think that's a mistake. We are hearing reassurances that the actual amount of money there is bigger than what we had up until now, but I'm not convinced. And first reason I'm not convinced is, and I think the problem is that first we are sending the wrong message. So we are saying message, health is not important, only defense is important. I don't agree with that. I think defense is important, but I think health is also important. I think health for European citizens is one of the top 3 priorities. If you look at any kind of survey, statistic, etc., and not to mention, and then, I mean, everybody is a patient in the end. So definitely, and if you're not a patient yourself, so you're a member of family, you have to take care of somebody. So everybody is connected with this, and this is why we need to send a message that healthcare is a priority and should be one of the main priorities. And to do that, we need to have a separate health program. The second important message is that health is not only about competitiveness. It's not only about the pharma industry. It's not only about the money, about trade wars, etc. This is also very important, especially access to medicines. But we also need public health in the EU budget. So not just competitiveness, but also very strong chapter on public health, and of course screenings as one of the best public health measures. Definitely, that can play a big role. So that's the second reason why we need a separate health program. And the third is that if you don't have a separate health program, then it's much easier to move funds from health to some other priority. And this is definitely something that we don't need. So if you want to have a more or less protected, it's never fully protected, but it's much harder to take money away from health if you have a separate health program than if it is spread around on competitiveness, preparedness, or whatever. So these are the 3 reasons why I need a separate health program. We need a strong public health chapter there, and in that program, screenings as one of the most cost-effective public health instruments need to play a big role. You already, I'm sure, mentioned all of the benefits of screening, of early detection in terms of early diagnosis, better treatment, better health outcomes, and all that. And I think definitely I don't have to prove to you why this is important, and the EU can play a role, can help, but to do that we need to have a strong public health budget in the public health program in the EU budget. And my plea to you is also to use as much as possible the pressure on the member states, especially on national governments, to change what they as much as possible the proposal by the Commission. We'll do our part from the Parliament. But we need broader support, and my plea is to you as well, so you can also play a role to do what we can to have a plan, but to actually have money to implement it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MEP Sokol, for your commitment and for your support, and for actually endorsing the Brussels Declaration, which you mentioned earlier. I did notice we have a picture with you in our brochure as well. So that's a very timely discussion for sure. Shall we go for 3rd time lucky with our video? Let's see.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation to be here at the EU in Brussels, where I can speak about familial hypercholesterolemia.
It's a deadly disease if it's not cured, and we do have the means to take care of the patient.
During the course of my university, I never heard about familial hypercholesterolemia. So it's a disease which is not very well known by the doctor.
I don't feel that enough has been done in Europe to prevent
strategy across Europe for FH, and we also need to raise awareness for FH.
Some countries are more advanced than others, but certainly in some countries it's less than 1% of FH cases that are identified.
Many patients with FH are not treated properly, even if they are detected, even if they.
One thing to improve within the next year will be the screening issue, because there's still a great lack of screening, and we have to convince our healthcare providers that it's an important issue.
Et je pense que là, il faut vraiment qu'on se bouge tous ensemble en Europe pour pouvoir médiatiser cette maladie.
I think the most important thing is that we should identify those individuals at a young age, because then you can really dodge the bullet.
We have 19 European countries in the network, and that is growing.
In Belgium, for example, for identifying the FH, I think go through the media first, and also through the GP.
Sick of talking. We've done it. Let's now take some action and actually find those patients, identify them, find the families, and keep the family any more people unnecessarily.
Essentially, what we were trying to show with the video is that the patient advocacy community on FH has been calling for action for a decade now. That is the top line message from this video. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if you could see, but it's a room very similar to this in a period very close to today. So it's 10 years on the dot of tireless work from the community. And we are now in the close of having a plan that it's dedicated for cardiovascular prevention. And hopefully this will also address the inherited lipid disorders. To close this first session, we turn to Magdalena D'Acor, CEO of FH Europe Foundation, who will reflect on this 10-year journey from patient stories to system level change. Magdalena.
Thank you so much, Hvala. I was wondering if we played for the when we played for the third time the video, maybe there is a bit of a message. Maybe it's a little bit embarrassing that nothing has changed in the past 10 years. And it's embarrassing to admit. Honorable members of the Parliament, dear colleagues, dear friends, ambassadors, patients, we began today with listening to the voices of young people living with inherited lipid disorders. Their stories remind us what's at stake. Every misdiagnosis means a child, a family, a future put at risk. Then we heard from the members of the House, the two of them, who reminded us of the political responsibility to act. It is now my privilege to share how, over the past decade, lived experience has become system change. How a movement that began with patients, and that was the video, and the patient voices has grown into a global, and I dare say global, force for prevention. FH Europe was set up in 2015, and it was a small UK-based charity with a big issue to resolve. But it was until COVID that we actually were able to articulate the unmet needs. COVID was in many ways the tipping point for all the wrong reasons. For all the wrong reasons, cardiovascular disease suddenly became a headline. Patients with inherited lipid disorders were recognized as a high-risk group. Neglected conditions like familial hypercholesterolemia and elevated Lp(a) were pushed into the spotlight, and families affected by rare and severe lipid disorders finally found recognition. Paradoxically, the pandemic brought us closer together. It opened doors we thought were out of reach. And it proved that we had always known that our cause is not niche. It is central to Europe's public health resilience. 90 million people today in Europe live with one of the inherited lipid conditions. 90 million. Since then, we have grown into a network of almost 36 patient organizations across Europe, with partnerships stretching to Singapore, the US, the Middle East, Australia, and China. We're helping families create patient organizations where none existed, supporting campaigns for access to therapies, and empowering people so that no one has to face this journey alone. And I hope the patient ambassadors here were testimony. The path has not been straight. There have been highs and lows, moments of triumph and moments of despair. But every step has taught us something and made us stronger. This transformation was never the work of one person or one office. It has been the result of collaboration, of unity and conviction that science must be carried into advocacy, into policy, and now, finally, into implementation. It is the patient movement working hand in hand with scientists, and I'm so delighted that many of them are here today with us. Clinicians, societies, policymakers, and partners that has driven this agenda forward. Together, we have shown that progress is possible when we do the right things right for the right reason. We're also proud a member of the European Alliance for Cardiovascular Health, joining forces with like-minded organizations to ensure cardiovascular prevention is firmly anchored in Europe's health agenda. The Prague and the Brussels declarations, which each of you should have received a copy. I do invite you to take the time because that was the result of many years of work, have been pivotal in giving inherited lipid disorders the visibility they deserve. They gave courage and confidence to many who once doubted that change was possible. They proved that step by step we could move from scientific consensus to political commitment. But now it is time for a decisive step forward to make early screening and detection together with equitable access to treatment and fully fledged, acknowledged, recognized, funded, and implemented approach to preventing cardiovascular disease for this and the next generation. Together with our partners, we have generated the tools and the evidence needed to support this step. Recognition of pediatric FH screening as an EU best practice opened the way for EU-funded projects such as Perfecto and FH Early. And that followed other projects like PermitFH, proved that patients are not just beneficiaries, but co-creators of innovation. We helped shape landmark milestones. The mentioned Prague Declaration on pediatric screening, which has already inspired national action in Poland, in Croatia, Germany, and I am so delighted to say over the weekend, even in France, it was announced that FH pediatric screening will be piloted. The Brussels International Declaration on Lp(a), which raised global attention to a risk factor affecting 1 in 5. We also contributed to the European Commission's consultation on the cardiovascular health plan only a few weeks ago. And our network responded in unprecedented numbers, proof of the strength of collective advocacy. And many of those people are here in the room today, so thank you, guys. Our expertise increasingly reflecting in clinical guidelines, and I nod here to Professor Nordesgaard, and recommendations, including pediatric FH, elevated Lp(a), and European lipid networks. But there is more to come, but I was just told before this meeting that I cannot share it just yet. And it pains me, because I would love to. Looking back, lessons that stand out: predictability. Risk from inherited lipid disorders can be identified from birth. To prevent the preventable, it's not a slogan, it's a duty. Prevention, early detection and timely treatment are investments in resilient health systems, not a burden. Equity, prevention must be for all, not determined by postcode, not left to luck, and not leaving behind those with rare conditions or those who care for them. And lastly, participation. You must have heard that. Nothing about us without us. Patients hold the power of the lived experience and the choice. And person-centered innovation, where personalized is not a cost, but a saving. Looking forward, we are no longer a small NGO seeking recognition. We are a foundation, a European network, a convener of expertise. We have credibility, partnerships, and a track record. But urgency remains. The message is clear. Europe now has the chance to do the right things right and for the right reasons, to turn declarations into delivery, to move from momentum to mandate, to ensure that inherited lipid disorders are integrated into the cardiovascular health plan with systematic screening, equitable access to therapies, and recognition for patients and caregivers across every member state. When I look back at the last 10 years, I see resilience. I see despair turned into determination and small victories celebrated as mountains climbed. I see a community that refused to give up and is now challenging and changing the system. And when I look ahead, I see possibility. MEP Jerkovic, I think we all see a possibility. An empowered patient movement working hand in hand with science, policy, industry, a Europe ready to lead the world in cardiovascular prevention. 10 years ago, we asked you not to let children grow up undiagnosed. Today, we return with proof that action works. But we also return with urgency, because for every success story, too many lives are still cut short. The next 10 years must be different. Together, let us prevent the preventable, protect future generations, and make cardiovascular health the cornerstone of a competitive and compassionate Europe. Thank you. Paula.
Thank you, Magdalena, and thank you all for your work, your courage, your honesty, and clarity. These testimonies do remind us that early detection saves lives, but late diagnosis and unequal access still costs too many. We have heard that today in this discussion. Now, the call is clear, be it that we speak about FH, elevated Lp(a), or other lipid disorders. The call is very much similar. No more wasted years, no more wasted lives. It's just that simple. And with that, I would like to turn to our next session, where leading experts will show us the evidence, the science behind the economics and the policy tools which are proving that prevention pays off, exactly what Magdalena was telling us a minute earlier. The aim here is, though, to keep these human voices, these human stories at the center of our discussion. And with that, I move into another tricky zone because we have a video to play from a speaker that's based all the way in Australia, and that's why she's joining us via video. But our next guest will look at the evidence and the economics, and the fact that prevention is seen as a cost. It's again, one of those things that I'm still reconciling with in my mind. But now it's time to hear from Professor Zanfina Ademi, who will present why testing for FH and Lp(a) is not just a wise investment, but also cost saving. So let's try.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Zanfina Ademi. I'm Professor of Health Economics at Monash University, Australia. Today, I'm going to take you through two studies with regards to familial hypercholesterolemia. We'll illustrate the case studies and systematic evidence, and also lipoprotein testing cost-effectiveness study evidence from high-income countries. When we look at familial hypercholesterolemia, we look at two aspects: identification and diagnosis, but also management and treatment of primary prevention of cardiovascular disease. In health economic terms, we are always interested to understand whether a new intervention is more beneficial and how much it's going to cost to the government and society. If intervention is more beneficial and less costly, we say it's cost saving. But if it's more beneficial and more costly, we have to apply willingness to pay threshold, which is specific to each country. So cost or price for additional years of life or quality adjusted life years. What I'm going to show you with regards to familial hypercholesterolemia, there are two case studies. One is about children, and the other one is population genomic screening. Because FH starts very early and it has impact in children, the guidelines suggest that we should treat children as early as possible at age 10. The Dutch FH screening, which started very in early 90s, has shown a beneficial impact of cascade screening. In a similar way, an Australian study has shown that cascade screening in children can be beneficial. Now, in this study, we wanted to understand if we treat children from age 10 in comparison to standard of care, where people will start treatment very late in life, is it going to be cost effective or not? So what we found that cholesterol years or treating early matters. So early screening versus standard of care has saved almost 8 years. We've saved in healthcare costs, but also we've saved in societal costs. If we look at specifically the Dutch study, every dollar that the Dutch ministry has invested in FH screening has returned 8.38 euros. Population genomic screening, here we are focusing on individuals 18 to 40 years of age. If we screen and treat them early, whether going to be cost effective in comparison to standard of care. As I mentioned, standard of care, people start treatment very late, and only small proportion of individuals at the population is identified. The current data say that it's only 5%. What we've shown with the population genomic screening over a lifetime, we not only saved lives, but we also improved quality of life, and genomic screening actually saved cost from a societal perspective. We were also interested to understand how these results will apply in European Union. We've shown that countries like Italy, Germany, Spain, Slovenia, France, and Netherlands, our results were cost effective if we do population genomic screening. We also have reviewed evidence, cascade screening, screening family members, opportunistic screening, when you go and visit, do a routine checkup, population screening, and systematic screening. All of this screening for FH has shown to be cost-saving and cost-effective. In conclusion, cascade screening showed the greatest benefits per person screened. However, in order to raise overall detection rate for FH, we have to combine it with systematic screening and population-wide screening. Now I'm going to take you through a second case study, which is Lp(a) testing cost-effectiveness study. We were interested to understand whether Lp(a) testing in primary prevention can be used to adjust the management of traditional risk factor and whether it's cost effective. So what is Lp(a) measurement good for? Risk prediction and drawing the conclusions. We have used one of the largest data set, UK Biobank. We have selected 10,000 individuals aged 40 to 69 years of age. And we wanted to understand and look at the current clinical practice, such as SCORE2. How does it classify individuals, high risk or very high risk? But with the intervention, because UK Biobank has data on lipoprotein A, we wanted to understand if we add this information to the clinical practice, how is this going to reclassify individuals? We have used a lipoprotein A threshold of 50 milligrams per deciliter. And with this information, we were able to reclassify 20% of individuals as high risk. Whereas before, with the standards of care, these people were not classified as high risk. So we built a novel health economic model where we have traced individuals from age 40 to 69 years of age, and we followed them up until age 85. We have captured their cholesterol years, blood pressure years, smoking status, diabetes, and lipoprotein A. We were interested to know how many events we can prevent and how many years of life we can save and how many costs we can save with an introduction of lipoprotein A. You can see that the model starts with healthy population and individuals can move. They can either develop diabetes, have a heart attack and stroke, but also can have cardiovascular death and non-cardiovascular death. We were also not interested to capture the healthcare costs, but we also interested to capture the societal perspective cost. How are people returning to work and workforce dropouts, such as absenteeism and presenteeism, and how productive they were when they were at work. So here are the results. In 10,000 individuals, we were able to reclassify 20% of them. We have saved 10 strokes and we have averted 82 heart attacks in 10,000 individuals. In terms of quality of life over a lifetime, in UK, we were able to save around 255, in Australia 270. This difference is because different practices for health economic discounting. In terms of cost, of course, it costs a little bit more to implement lipoprotein A, but when we look at over a lifetime, healthcare costs there is a large amount of healthcare costs that it saves. In terms of productivity losses, we save quite a lot as well. So overall, for Australia and United Kingdom, lipoprotein testing, it's cost saving for UK, and for Australia, it was cost effective based on willingness to pay threshold. We were also very interested to understand how these results apply to high income countries. Cost saved per person from a societal perspective, for example, in US was more than $1,000. In Germany was 447 euros. In Austria was around 437 euros. Then we were also interested savings at the population level for age 40 to 69. In US, we were able to save 140 billion if lipoprotein testing will be able to implement it. In Germany, it's just below 20 billion. In conclusion, lipoprotein A is cost saving in high income countries. Improving CVD prevention is a public health priority. Findings are primary from high-income countries. Analysis included only heart attacks and strokes. Lipoprotein A is responsible for other outcomes. Despite the global guidelines and consensus, lipoprotein testing is not routinely measured. We believe that our work will strengthen the case for implementing lipoprotein testing in clinical practice to quantify the burden of cardiovascular disease. Many thanks for your attention and thank you for having me.
And now let us hear from leading scientific and clinical experts whose work on inherited lipid disorders laid the foundation for two landmark declarations. Professors Nordesgaard, Wigman, and Cronenberg will show how science, carried forward by patient advocacy, became powerful multi-stakeholder initiatives. The Prague and Brussels declarations are now used worldwide to call for early screening and detection, preventing cardiovascular diseases before they strike. Professors, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me first thank you so much for being allowed and invited to come and speak here. It's both a great joy, but also a privilege to try to say something. I will start with something a little bit different because I have a little bit of a déjà vu sitting here, because I had a similar thing in the Danish parliament about 8, 9 years ago, arguing the case in a hearing like this that we should screen for familial hypercholesterolemia in Denmark. And this was after I had personally spoken with 9 different spokespersons for the 9 political parties in the Danish parliament. So we had this hearing, and then after that I was allowed to have a 15 minutes presentation at the overall health committee for Denmark. And after that, they gave us money to do it. So now we have a full program that we, within 10 to 15 years, can find everybody with FH in Denmark. So it is possible. So what you're doing here today, if Europe is the right thing, try to have politicians help implement something that is so logically, of course we should do it. So back to what I'm supposed to talk about now is that I'm president of European Atherosclerosis Society, and I show you here on the slide some of the guidelines. European Atherosclerosis Society is a society that was started in 1964, so it's more than 60 years old. And this was the society that first wrote lipid guidelines in Europe, or how to prevent cardiovascular disease. Then about 6 years later, we decided to join with the European Society of Cardiology because it's a very big organization. But it's always our society that has been driven the thing with lipid forward because we are the ones that know most about that and most about. And the cardiologists listen to us. So we now write guidelines together with them. And what is shown in this one here is the latest and most important one is the 2019 ESC, European Society of Cardiology, EAS, European Atherosclerosis Society. And then there's a big prevention guideline that come a few years later, 2021, you can see here, which encompasses not just lipids, but also hypertension and diabetes. But we are also part of that. And then 3 weeks ago, there was a focused update on this 2019 thing that has a big focus on Lp(a). Can I have the next one, please? So in the EU, 33% of all deaths are cardiovascular. I think that's a lot. I don't know what you think, but I think that's a lot. 1 in 3 dies from it. Cardiovascular expenses, we already heard it, 282 billion per year. So most cardiovascular diseases, just listen, are preventable through lipid-lowering treatment. That's all you need to do, lipid-lowering therapy. And that leads to less cardiovascular disease, less premature death, and of course, thereby long-term savings for national budgets. So it is such a simple story. That's the one I made for the Danish parliamentarians. They understood it, they implemented it. So what I show here is that there's 3 lipids that are important for driving atherosclerosis, namely LDL, what you get from many of it from bad food, but not the genetic version. And then the remnants you get from all this obesity epidemic we have today. And this leads to early atherosclerosis, more and more severe atherosclerosis, eventually plaque ruptures, and the 2 diseases that kills people, namely myocardial infarction and stroke. Then we have lipoprotein(a), which probably work by a different way, that once you have a beginning stroke or beginning myocardial infarction, it makes it a lot worse. Next one, please. So as I show here now, that when you look at the overall population, not just the genetic ones, I come back to that, then it's actually 1 in 2 that have high LDL cholesterol. It is 1 in 3 that have high remnants, and it's 1 in 5 that had high Lp(a). So it's a huge number of the population of this continent called Europe. Next slide, please. What I try to illustrate here is the data for on the x-axis, you can see age in years, and on the y-axis is the cumulative LDL cholesterol exposure. That's what's important for familial hypercholesterolemia. If you look at the green curve, this is how fast it goes up, and when you get to a value of about 160 millimoles in total, that's when people are at risk of getting myocardial infarction or angina pectoris. If you look at the red curve, that is the ones with heterozygous FH, where nothing happens. They're just undiagnosed. And then it's shown that if you start, for example, giving statins in early age, it could be about 8, 9, 10 years old, you can change that curve. So it almost gets very close to the green one. If you wait just till they become adults, even if you get very high LDL lowering medications, it's not possible to get what normal people have. You have to be like some of the things we heard about. Find them early, treat them early, and they can live a completely normal life. No diseases, nothing. They can have children, whatever they want to do in their life. And then there's the really, really bad thing, namely the one that are blue, where you can see the curves go way up. That's homozygous FH. And Joanna, thank you so much for telling your story. That's exactly the one that you have. Then untreated, age 12 and a half years, you can hit that group. And that's exactly what happened to Joanna's sister when she died early on. So if we find these also, we can also do something for them. The next one, please. So this is just a simple cartoon of trying to explain this familial hypercholesterolemia. So it's a dominant inherited disease, meaning that you get it directly from your parents. It's the one that kills most people in the entire world for the dominant inherited. And you can say cardiovascular disease and FH is 100% preventable using statins for heterozygous FH if you do it early on. For the homozygous, you need a lot more medication, but today we actually have medications that can completely prevent it, even in homozygous FH. They're more expensive, but it's also very rare diseases. And you can see down below, and I show that 1 in 3 in Europe, where we have 450 million persons in the EU, will have heterozygous FH. So if you multiply these, it's 1.5 million in total. And homozygous FH, that is 1 in 360,000, but that's still 3,300 in EU. Next slide, please. I have this case that I think we talk about the young ones, but I think for policy point of view, it's also worth thinking about old age. This is a paper that I wrote together with a person called Mortensen, published in The Lancet a few years ago, what it shows different age groups, and then on the y-axis, how much is the risk when LDL cholesterol goes up? And you can actually see the 70 to 800 years old, they have much, much higher risk of cardiovascular disease than the younger ones. So we should focus on the genetically young ones, but in a health plan, also make sure to look at the entire population. Next slide, please. This is illustrating, so these remnants of high triglycerides, how you get those. So low calorie, low fat intake, illustrated by a farmer in India. You can see what he eats. He has normal blood, normal liver, normal heart, but when you get into the Western diet, and unfortunately we learned a lot from the Americans on how to eat badly sometimes, you can see then you get a belly, so you have a lot of fat in your body, you have a lot of fat in your blood, in your liver, and you get heart attacks. Next slide, please. So we should not forget, and I think, Tiva, you're a very good illustration of that with your daughter, namely that if you have very high triglycerides, this is common fat, this is the fat you see in butter, for example. If you have that in your blood, you have these chylomicrons that are very large in white. They show how much triglycerides are. And when they are degraded, they lead to inflammation. And if it is in the pancreas, you get acute pancreatitis, which is potentially a deadly disease. Down below is that if you have lower triglycerides, but still have these remnants, then you get foam cell atherosclerosis and myocardial infarction. Next slide, please. So Lp(a), why is it important? As shown in green, in evolution, it actually happened twice. So the European hedgehog has it, and there's a different words in apes, monkeys, and humans. So it must be something doing good at young age. But we know now that as we survive young age and live to old age, then we suddenly get diseases from it, maybe from the same by getting thrombosis. I don't know, 2 days ago, I lived in the same house in Copenhagen for 30 years. And 2 days ago, for the first time, I saw a hedgehog in my garden. So in the evening, so my neighbor came and looked. So I think maybe that's a good sign that this meeting will not be waste. Maybe something good will come out of it. That's what I'm thinking anyway. Next one, please. So Lp(a) shown here on the x-axis is the distribution, and on the y-axis how many of the populations are. And they're very different by ethnicity. So the reddish one is like what it is in Europe. That's for white people. But the blue one is the distribution in black people. So for example, we also have a lot of black people in EU, and they will have much higher concentration, and they have even more higher risk of cardiovascular disease because they have higher concentrations. Next one, please. What about the future? So I like to think about the future, and what would, in my mind, be the ideal that the EU health plan would do? Next one, please. It would be that at age 4 to 6, we should offer a full lipid profile plus lipoprotein(a). And this would be, could for example be at vaccinations, it could be offered to children. And this was to find heterozygous FH, 1 in 300, to find homozygous FH, 1 in 360,000, and find familial chylomicronemia syndrome. It is so simple to do these lipid tests, and they're completely diagnostic for finding these 3 conditions. And it is not very expensive. Lipid tests are really, really inexpensive to run. And then in adults, we should also have a program for adults. It could be at cardiovascular risk, it could also be at young adults, but they should equally have both Lp(a) and a full lipid profile. They will find all of them high Lp(a), and then they would also find the more common things, high LDL, high remnants, and high triglycerides, so we could prevent these diseases in everybody. Next slide, please. And this is my final one. I've always been said that I don't understand this. Why not do something about it? Why wait for people having diseases? It is so easy to screen and diagnose these diseases. And it's very easy and inexpensive to prevent. And of course, the majority of these things we talk about can be done by giving statins early on. And I know there's a lot of fake news about statin side effects, but for practical purpose, they have really no side effects. 1 in 1,000 have serious side effects. It comes into people's mind. There's been all this fake news. It's a bit like we have in the US, there's fake news about everything. Now, we had that for statins for many, many years. So statins, to a lot of these people, would solve the whole problem. Thank you so much for your attention.
And to continue with that, there's now also fake news about paracetamol. Some president says that's bad for you. Thank you for the invitation. I feel honored to be here. I feel also an urgent need to be here to prevent the preventable. I'm a proud secretary of the board of FH Europe Foundation, pediatric cardiologist. We had a Prague Declaration on FH pediatric screening already a few years ago. Can I have the next slide? Everybody now knows about cholesterol and heart attack, and this is a graph where you see the development, and then you make slices, and every specialist, every doctor thinks in the direction of the arrow. We should think in the opposite direction. The moment cholesterol enters the blood, lower the cholesterol, and the cholesterol out of the vessel wall will vanish. We know that now for many years. So the earlier the better. If it stays there, it becomes calcified. Next slide, please. To treat those with FH early, we have to find them early. Worldwide, every minute a child with FH is born, and worldwide, every day a child with homozygous FH is born. So in the Netherlands, per day, 2 children with FH are born, and in Germany, even 8 children per day. For Europe, an estimation of 2.5 million people, of whom 500,000 are children having FH, and within European Union, 300,000. FH is diagnosed late. 56 countries combined their data in 42,000 people, adults and some adolescents. The median age was 44 for diagnosis. Then a lot is calcified. Even then, new cholesterol develops and you can remove that. So it's helpful for them as well. Next slide, please. according to the genes, the child is the product of the parents, as these T-shirts beautifully show you. I was awakened in 1992 when I did a heart cath on a 12-year-old who had complete occlusion of his coronary artery, and with a stent, it was reopened, and he is now 45. So the stent is already there for 33 years. Europe awakened when 6 children died in 2010, 11, and 12 in Italy, France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the UK in ages of 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, and 6. 4 of them are published. This is one of the publications. I will only show you this one. A 4-year-old boy with an LDL cholesterol of 20, 770 milligrams per deciliter. First-line treatment, no substantial effect. He died at kindergarten at the age of 4. And if you look at the right-hand side, you see the autopsy where all the blood has to go through 2% that was left open. 98% was occluded. And you can imagine this is not a matter of days, but also not a matter of decades. It is a matter of months to years. Nowadays, with the new treatments, homozygous FH, all my 43 homozygous FH are still alive because they know their diagnosis and are treated well. Next slide, please. Early detection means better lifestyle choices. The optimal age for detection, Wald already discovered that in 2007, is between 1 and 9. And we're proud in Croatia and Slovenia to do universal screening in 5, 6-year-olds. When you have detected them, it's not to tell them that they have a burden. No, they have the chance to become 100 if they stick to healthy diet, not smoking, exercise, take their medication, and look to the left and the right when they cross the road. And all the children think, oh, that is doable. Next. So we need to see them before they already started smoking. Of the 4,100 children with FH on my outpatient ward, 3,800 were non-smokers. None of them started. 6, 7, 8-year-olds looked with big eyes and say, I don't smoke. Okay, continue. 300 were already smoking. None of them stopped. Then you are too late. They think, okay. Here, we published this in the New England Journal of Medicine. We compared the parents who had access to statins with a median age of 32 to their children who had access at a median age of 13. They were in between 8 and 18. And we followed them up for 20 years. Recently, we followed them up for 25 years. It's even worse for the parents. But what you can see is none of the children died, and many are now in their 40s and are parents themselves. And that's not only matters the parent, but it affects the whole family, as Lena Rosa pointed out. So death, of course, but heart attacks as well. Already 26% of the parents had their heart attack treated from 32, whereas only one child of the 214 had a stent at the age of 28 because he stopped at 18 taking drugs and started smoking. And now we continue and we see we have probably a sort of cure. Next slide. So we had the Prague Declaration. It started 1 year earlier, or exactly even some earlier, because the EU mentioned us to be a best practice portal, Slovenia and the Netherlands, and we were recognized, and there was a Slovenian EU presidency in collaboration with Eurordis, and we had that, the start of the year after in Czech Republic, under the EU presidency of Czech Republic, led to the declaration. And the next slide will mention 7, and I will at least mention political leadership and commitment to make FH pediatric screening a reality. In investment and a policy framework for raising awareness of FH amongst medical practitioners and the public. early detection, screening, diagnosis, and life course care programs in every EU country. Specific action to encourage large-scale uptake of screening programs and subsequent treatment. Targeted research and development to address knowledge gaps. Capacity building of health professionals and empowering patient advocacy communities. Commitment to shared learnings through international exchange and comparisons across the wider Europe. And I end with 3 final slides just to show you, and you can read it in this booklet, that it happened in the Czech Republic Senate, and the Deputy Minister of Health was there to sign as well this Prague Declaration. Next slide. And Dr. Roman Kraus, the member of the Czech Senate, chaired the Healthcare Committee of the Senate. And it started in Czech Republic. It's not just on paper, as you mentioned in Denmark, the moment you act. So the final slide will be, there are many, many endorsements for the Prague Declarations, as you can see over here. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, professors. We have one more intervention on this panel, which is a video one. Are we okay with that? But before we play the video, just quick apologies from Professor Cronenberg, who cannot be with us today in person, but is online. So if there are questions at the end, he's happy to take them.
Good afternoon. My name is Florian Cronenberg. I'm heading the Institute of Genetic Epidemiology at the Medical University of Innsbruck, and I'm chair of the LPLA International Task Force. I'm very happy to present you today the Brussels International Declaration on LPLA testing and management. So what is LPLA? We clearly know that high LPLA is the next target to fight cardiovascular disease after we know already that LDL is a really important risk factor. It turned out that LPLA is even more important. It's a causal and one of the strongest risk factors for heart attacks and strokes, and it is more dangerous than LDL cholesterol. We know that 1 person in 5 in this room has high LPLA concentrations. That means when we look at the entire global population, that roughly 1.4 billion people are globally affected by high LPLA concentration. Therefore, it's a very common risk factor for cardiovascular disease. We also know that only 1 or 2% are tested to date. We also know that the higher the concentration is, the higher is the risk, as we can see in this figure here. When we go to those people who have the highest concentration, they have a 3-fold risk for cardiovascular events. So that means it's of enormous public health relevance. So when we look at the absolute lifetime risk for cardiovascular disease, I would like to ask you not only to focus on the high LPLA concentration, but also on the traditional risk factors, because the combination is a very bad cocktail, as we can see in this graph here. If people have a high number of traditional risk factors and at the same time a high LPLA concentration, then the lifetime risk can go up to 68%. This is quite high compared to the situation that we know that roughly a third of the population is finally dying from cardiovascular disease in the European Communion. And these traditional risk factors are, for example, age, sex, blood cholesterol, blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, a family history of heart attacks in early life, and body mass index. So it's therefore very important, if the LPLA concentration is not considered in the risk estimation, the cardiovascular risk might be underestimated substantially. From this graph, we can already see the urgent goal. The urgent goal is to reduce the traditional risk factors, and here starting prevention early is really the key. Not to wait till a person has developed already cardiovascular disease, because this is too late. We have to start very early in life to bring down these traditional risk factors. And in the future, we might have also drugs which can lower LPLA concentrations. So here are the 5 key asks of the Brussels International Declaration. LPA should be part of cardiovascular health plans. This not only on the European community, but also at the national and international level. We need policy and programs for LPA testing and management to save costs, as we have seen from the cost effectiveness analysis. Then we need political leadership and commitment for systematic LPA testing with full reimbursement. Furthermore, global cardiovascular risk assessment should also include the LPA concentration beside the other risk factors. And finally, raising awareness about LPA is extremely important because this knowledge is not really out in the public. We are very grateful and like to thank MEP Romana Jerkovic for hosting us in Brussels and to support us for the Brussels Summit and for the present meeting today. She was one of the first who realized the importance of this project and made a strong commitment by signing the Brussels International Declaration. Furthermore, we are very grateful for the Commissioner Verheugen because he has prevention very high up in his agenda and that he fully agrees that prevention needs to start at an early age to support healthy lifestyle and that early screening and detection for those at risk is essential. Finally, I would like to thank all those organizations which have already endorsed the Brussels International Declaration, including the many single individuals. I hope that many will follow, since this was only the starting point. Since 1 out of 5 citizens is affected by high LPA concentrations, they are in need of your support and endorsement of the Brussels Declaration. Thank you very much for your attention.
A big thank you to our speakers for showing us how patient-led advocacy and science came together to create these 2 important tools, the Prague and Brussels declarations. We now turn to Kitty Almer, who will guide us through the Council conclusions adopted in December 2024, which was a milestone moment for cardiovascular health in Europe. We are drawing on her past role as a health attaché and chair of the Public Health Working Party during the Hungarian Council presidency. Kitty brings a unique perspective on how these conclusions were shaped and what they mean for the future. Kitty, welcome. And could you tell us how the declarations we've heard about earlier, together with these Council conclusions, connect to the Cardiovascular Health Action Plan?
Thank you very much, Madalena, for the question and also for the very kind introduction. Very nice to be among you and very nice to be back in the Parliament on speaking about the Council conclusions once more, but from a different perspective now. Now we've heard very much in detail what the Prague Declaration and the Brussels International Declarations are including, but I also want to get a little bit more into the Council conclusions that have been mentioned also by MEP Jerkovic and also by MEP Sokol during their speeches. These Council conclusions were the foundation stone for the Cardiovascular Health Plan. I can say that without being modest, because this was actually the time when the member states came together, all 27, 26, because the Hungarian presidency was the honest broker during that time. And we sat together that we need to put a health plan specified on cardiovascular health. Beating Cancer Plan was something that showed us that this works. And it also, just because health is a member state competence does not mean that the European Union cannot support with these action plans. It was a difficult time. Council conclusions are something that is accepted by all member states. It's not a recommendation coming from the Commission that is only requiring qualified majority, but all member states need to agree upon what is in these Council conclusions. So it is consensus-based. It is a political mandate which is inviting both the Commission, what needs to be done on a very specific level, and also the member states, what should be done there. And because of the Commission is also there during the negotiations, and all 27 member states need to agree on that, I can say that it is a promise that member states and also European Commission needs to follow up with because they all agreed. The idea behind the Council conclusions was to make this action plan a reality. But the action plan should not be only focusing on one specific part of healthcare. We wanted to build something holistic, something that also focuses on prevention, screening, treatment, and innovation, and last but not least, very importantly, rehabilitation. Naturally, what we needed to put most of our effort into was the prevention pillar. And we are very happily saying at that moment still that the prevention pillar is one of the strongest parts of the Council conclusions, which I'm very happy with. We had a few obstacles. The EP election was before our presidency. After that, the new commission had to be set up. Of course, because of this, the Commission was a little hesitant to agree upon a Council conclusion that is containing such a big invitation towards them. However, the stars aligned. And by the time that we actually got for the formal EBSCO meeting on the 3rd of December, Oliver Várhelyi has already been appointed, the commissioner, who was very luckily behind us, who happens to be also Hungarian, but that has nothing to do with that. So we were very happy that even before the Council conclusions were adopted formally, he already announced the action plan. So even before the member states agreed upon, the Commission already made a promise, so that's what I would call a highlight of my career. And in these Council conclusions, these inherited lipid disorders were for the first time consensually agreed upon that this is one of the risk factors that needs to be taken very seriously. Familial hypercholesterolemia and elevated lipoprotein A are spelled out black and white in this policy document. That's why it is important for you to understand why Council conclusions are something that you can wave into anybody's desk at a governmental level in the member states because, hey, you promised. How can they be used? The Council conclusions is giving you the political mandate. It's a political mandate for you and for the government to work on something that they promised upon and you want it to happen. The declarations are the tools that are showing what and why and how should it be done. With these two combinations, I would say is a perfect dossier to bring to a table for a politician, for a government, to say, this is what you promised and this is how it should be done. When are you going to do this and how we can help you? This is actually something very important to show this because this is a ground-up initiative. This is coming from science, from patients, from clinicians, something that, sorry to say, policymakers have very little approach to. And very little idea. Sometimes their background does not allow. Of course, there are very, very good examples. For example, MEP Jerkovic coming from a medical background, but me, for example, is coming from public health policy. I do not have the clinical perspective of that. We know that CVH is right now in the highest level of the politicians. Just last Thursday, almost at this time, we met with Oliver Várhelyi personally. And he was very open to our discussion. He was very much understanding why inherited lipid disorders as genetic diseases are the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to screening. The genetic disorders are something that can be just easily screened and that can be modified later with lifestyle. It's not the other way around, that you modify your lifestyle first with bad habits and then you get the disease. So it's exactly what he realized as well, and we were very happy to see his Xbox as well, saying that 90% of people are not screened for familiar hypercholesterolemia. And we do have a good feeling that this is something that the cardiovascular health plan is going to take into account. But we cannot forget about the member states, and I cannot highlight this enough. Once we have the action plan, it's something that we can cherish and we can recommend for member states what to do, and the funding is going to be there, hopefully. But we cannot stop there. Member states are there, and member states' competence is something to be taken seriously. We need to go there. We need to go to the governments, talk to politicians, and let them know what they promised in 2024, 3rd of December. So to conclude, we did not want to create something during the Hungarian presidency that's just going to be another piece of document, and it's going to go back up into one of the drawers, and it's going to be dusting there for years. And as far as I can tell, since the 3rd of December, CVH has been the talking point of many of the meetings that are also happening here in the EP. So I believe I can tell that we did our job. It's on the agenda. And let's keep it on the agenda together with elevated lipid disorders, with lipid disorders, because this is something that cannot be ignored. Genetic diseases cannot never be ignored again. And especially hearing your stories, Lena, Joanna, Aidan, and Tavi, we need to listen to you. And we need to go further what you are asking from us. So let's go together, hand in hand, and let's hope that we can prevent the preventable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kitty, for this important perspective. I think what's important is, we see the alignment here. We see alignment between science, advocacy, and political will, so that should give us hope. Before I move on to the next panel, I know that some of our patients might need to catch some flights, so if you see people standing up and leaving, it's because of that, but I wanted to address a heartfelt thank you for being with us today, first and foremost. Now it's time to move into seeing what can European money do for us as patients, for the community. And we've previously heard from young patients, from the caregivers, and we have reflected on the two declarations. We've seen the economic case for testing and also heard about the council perspectives. It's now time to look at the innovation, and that comes through European projects. And it has now been more than 40 years since the Nobel Prize discovery of the LDL receptor pathway, and a few decades since the discovery of PCSK9, one of the main genetic drivers of familial hypercholesterolemia. And we are delighted to have Professor Marianne Abifadel, one of the leading figures of this research, with us today. Thank you so much for joining. And these discoveries have frankly transformed treatment and prevention. And yet today we have heard that fewer than 1 in 10 people with FH are identified. This shows up both the gap and the opportunities. So I am delighted to be joined by Professor Fausto Pinto, by Professor Mafalda Bourbon, by Associate Professor Andrei Panayotou, and by Dr. Marius Janta. To set the scene, let's start with a short video, fingers crossed, from Professor Pinto, who is a coordinator of Horizon Consortium FH Early.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of the European Parliament, dear colleagues, dear friends. It is a real pleasure for me to be with you, even if it is in a virtual way. Allow me to share a perspective that brings together science, clinical practice, advocacy, and policy, because that it is what innovation in inherited lipid disorders is all about. I have worn many hats over the years. As a cardiologist and head of cardiology in my university hospital here in Lisbon, Portugal, as president of the European Society of Cardiology, as president of the World Heart Federation, and today as the coordinator of the Horizon Europe project called FH Early. Across all these different roles, I have seen one truth again and again. If we want high-level policy change, we need high-level advocacy. And we need science and patients working hand in hand in co-design and in partnership. The FH Europe Foundation has been part of this journey with me since 2022, when we first worked together on FH in the context of the Slovenian presidency meeting. That moment started a collaboration which has only grown ever since. And for me, this is not just professional, it is also personal. I am very much committed to ensuring that early screening and detection will become a reality in my own country, Portugal. It is very important to showcase how the multi-stakeholder community has come together. And it is equally important to note that many of these initiatives have been led by FH Europe Foundation and the patient advocacy community, or have been co-designed and delivered with patients as equal partners. With the projects presented here, some funded by the European Union through the EU for Health and Horizon programs, we are providing answers, evidence, data, and innovative solutions. These are helping us to deliver faster and more personalized diagnosis and reaching citizens with messages that are relevant, accessible, and more likely to inspire action at different levels of society. These projects, Perfecto, Premed FH, and FH Early, could not have come at a better time. They address the most critical challenges that we face in inherited lipid disorders, genetics and genomics, early screening and accurate diagnosis, personalized pathways, and improved protocols for prevention. But they also integrate social and behavioral science, which is essential to ensure the general public response to the findings through personalized communication models and by understanding what actually motivates people to act for their health. As part of FH Early, we are also developing very practical innovations, a new chip array that will make genetic diagnosis faster and more affordable, explainable artificial intelligence designed to support healthcare professionals in their daily work, and at the core, an expert patient panel ensuring that those living with inherited lipid disorders guide the research and shape the solutions. Together, these projects show that innovation is not abstract. It is concrete, collaborative, scalable, and actionable. And with the right support from the European Union, small projects like this can scale up and go mainstream, making prevention and personalized care a reality for millions of European citizens. And this brings me back to the title of our event and this specific session. These EU-funded projects are not only creating innovation, they are laying the foundations to scale up screening, strengthening Europe's competitiveness, and protect future generations. They prove that with continued investment in research, collaboration, and patient-led innovation, cardiovascular prevention truly can become the cornerstone of a competitive and compassionate Europe. Finally, let me thank MEP Romana Jerkovic and MEP Tomislav Sokol for hosting this very important event and the patients community for leading the way to prevent the preventable. And I wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
We will now be moving to the panel in the room. So I will start with Dr. Janta. Thank you so much for joining us directly from New York after your intervention at UNGA. And we know each other from actually the cancer work and on policy work that we're doing. And we came to work on other EU-funded projects, but not on cardiovascular diseases. However, you are very active in this space, and you are also part of Perfecto FH. And perhaps you can tell us what is the key focus of this project, how did it came about, and furthermore, perhaps you can illustrate how findings from projects like Perfecto, like 4PCAN on primary prevention, can support maybe other lipid disorders and inherited lipid disorders.
Thank you very much, Madalena, and thank you for the invitation. Well, I think Perfecto is best to describe by its acronym. It's Perfecto. It's Perfecto. And I'll explain you very briefly in 5 bullet points why Perfecto is Perfecto. The first point, Perfecto, is about understanding, and one of the questions at the beginning put by MEP Jerkovic was what prevention means. And usually we discuss, and today we've discussed a lot about biomedical aspects, about genetics. This is very important, of course, about different models to implement screening in different health systems. This is very important. But if you look from the perspective of the health determinants, this is only 25% of our health. 70%, it's about individual behavior, social factors, and environmental factors. And Perfecto is looking to FH pediatric screening through the lens of these neglected health determinants, in particular social and individual behavioral factors. And what we did in Perfecto so far was to use different methods and tools from social sciences to take the advantages of generative AI and to build a personalized communication model. In other words, we analyze very complex social data, health system related data, quantitative and qualitative data, and we have been able to identify in Romania, but as well in Cyprus, different clusters at population level, and for each of the clusters, different personas. So in other words, we know if we like to implement a communication, an education, or literacy campaign in one of our countries and probably others, we know how to go really in a very personalized way. And we are actually using the same approach in FHLE through the involvement protocol, who is actually the basis for what Fausto mentioned earlier, the EPP, expert patient panel. The second the attribute of Perfecto is implementation. It's not just a very nice theoretical exercise recognized by the European Association for Preventative Cardiology, but it's about implementation. Currently in Cyprus and Romania running campaigns, and in Romania we are actually implementing a campaign at the national level. So we are looking to the macro level of the situation, and then we started to work with a group, very well-defined group of people, 60 persons, meso level, considering who are the influencers, who are the organization, who influence their choices, their preferences, and so on. And we started to identify people at high risk for cardiovascular diseases and to work with them at a very micro level. So 3 layers of implementation. The third point is very much linked to what I already said. It's about equity. And of course, I'm biased because I live in Romania, but this project actually is implemented in Romania, in Cyprus. Our colleagues from Bulgaria are involved in some activities in Perfecto. So what I'm trying to say is with this project, we are really building a model to address the East-West divide on one side, but as well because we implement this in rural settings. In Romania, in small towns, we can address the rural-urban dimension, inequities, and so on. So this is the third. The fourth is about synergies. So nobody, European Commission or HADEA, they don't ask us when starting Perfecto to do synergies other than the synergies with Jakarta. But, you know, people we've met in communities, they ask us to do something for their cardiovascular health. And this is how you mentioned, Madalena, for PCAM project. This is a project focusing on cancer primary prevention. This is how we actually started to organize joint activities between the 2 projects in Lereș Living Lab. It's an increasingly famous living lab dealing with NCD prevention overall. And in this living lab, what we did in June this year was to test, first of all, 200 persons from Romania for the lipid panels plus LP(a), and we calculated for them for the first time in a structured way in Romania the global cardiovascular risk, as Professor Cronenberg mentioned earlier today. And we are now in a position to see that we have access not only to medical data, some genetics data, but a lot of behavioral and social sciences data from this panel of individuals. And this integration was not done before. So this is a power of combining and creating synergies between the 2 projects, starting by listening to people, the real people. You go in a community, meet person, simply listen to them, and then they will guide you what to do. And the 5th point, the keyword is commitment. And you cannot find on cardiovascular health a group with more commitment to the cardiovascular health, to CVD prevention than the Perfecto group. Perfecto is co-funded by the European Commission. And Perfecto consists of 6 organizations, not-for-profits and academia, who committed to allocate 40% of the Perfecto budget for 2.5 years from our pockets. And I think this is an argument to look from this commitment perspective and to understand why and how this topic becomes so important for us. And my last comment is, of course, with Perfecto and FHRLE, we are on the path of having an impact. And from a business and probably competitiveness perspective, I think it makes absolutely sense to continue to invest in success. So from the next European Cardiovascular Health Plan perspective and future calls, I know that are some restrictions, but we cannot afford to lose the momentum and the achievements and the investments done by now, both by the European Commission and this small organization, but with a big impact.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janta. Since you mentioned FHRLE, maybe that's the natural segue towards Professor Bourbon. And my question here, it's quite simple. Could you kindly briefly explain both PERMED FH and FHRLE in simple terms, how they link together and some of the solutions that they are delivering?
Yeah, I'll try to be simple, but genetics is not that simple. But both projects are about diagnosis. That's the first step for everything. If you don't have if the patient is not diagnosed, nothing happens. And of course, clinical diagnosis is the most important, and it's where we are failing more. It's not the clinical diagnosis. Then the clinical diagnosis should be confirmed by genetic diagnosis. And that's where we get in. And the things like there are other diseases that have present with high LDL. It's not only FH. So what genetics does is to kind of personalize the diagnosis. So we are able to confirm FH or other lipid disorder, all in the same test. And we have lots of knowledge for that now. You said that we are 40 years after the Nobel Prize on the LDL receptor pathway. And these 40 years were built with lots of research to understand the mechanism, to develop assays, to understand better how the variants cause the disease. And that's PERMED FH is much about variants. So we know that not every variant in the DNA is casual. It doesn't lead to disease, not all of them. So we need to study the variants and know which ones are causing FH and which ones are not causing FH. So PERMED, we are doing all these functional assays in the lab to kind of prove that, like Lina Rosa said, that not every patient is the same. You know, same patients have a protein, this LDL receptor protein that clears better the LDL from the blood, and other patients have a protein that cleans very, very badly. So, and the treatment should be given according to this kind of the functionality of this protein. It depends, it's function well. It doesn't need to have such a stronger medication or such a polymedication. If it works worse, you have to go, you know, with all the medications available. So this is the main message for PERMED, and I hope, and we are going to create evidence for then the European Society of Atherosclerosis can include this kind of evidence in the guidelines. That would be very important, so we could go towards a more precise medicine, care, and prevention, everything. And it needs to be personalized, because these all other diseases that they can present with high LDL, some of them, they are not treated the same way. So if we are treating everyone in the same way, with the same program, we are doing harm. So personalized medicine is really important. The majority of the people with high LDL have FH, but some maybe not. And there comes FHRLE. FHRLE is really important because it's a bigger project. It has 15 institutions. Marius is a partner, Marianne is another partner. So we have different partners in this group, and we plan to go further. So we are going to also look at the diagnosis. So we are, like Professor Fausto Pinto just mentioned, we are going to, my lab is in charge of creating a chip array. That it's going to be, it's a screening method, and it's going to be like 1/8 of the cost of having a genetic testing, like by NGS, by next generation sequencing. And if we are successful, and I hope we will be, the cost of testing is going to go really down. So cost effectiveness is going to go higher and higher and more possible. So this is like a quicker and more affordable test. But FH Early has another 2 big solutions that we are implementing. One is a biomarker that it has been developed at the University of Helsinki, and now is being kind of validated in FH Early. And what we want is to have that biomarker to kind of personalize treatment as well, to see which kind of treatment for kind of metabolism that each person has. So that's really important. And we have also a model by explainable AI that will join all the studies that we're going to do. We are going to do studies in genomics, transcriptomics, epigenomics, so all the omics. So it's several layers of information that then AI is going to work and is going to give us some solutions, some tools that we can use, for example, to analyze the electronic health records, finding another ways to find these patients. So it's going to be really important. And one of the major parts of FH Early as well is to try to look at the patients that they look like FH, so they have a clinical diagnosis of FH, but we don't find anything. So we are talking about a person that has a high LDL, above 200 milligrams per deciliter, has a family history of hypercholesterolemia, but then we don't find a variant. And that happens in 50% of the cases. So we really need to go and look forward to see what is happening, what is the metabolism going wrong here. And for that, we are going to study from 4 cohorts in Europe, patients with that we call FH negatives, and try to find new mechanisms, new genes, maybe new mechanism with the known genes, but also maybe new genes, maybe it's not FH, maybe it's another disorder. So it's very important we determine which disorder it is so you can personalize the treatment. So the way forward is personalized diagnosis and personalized treatment.
That it's so important for us as patients and as advocates. Thank you very much for explaining that to us. And in closing of this panel, I will move to Professor Panayotou. As part of Perfecto and representing Cyprus, a member state who will take on the Council presidency very soon, how projects like Perfecto support member states and why their findings are relevant for the upcoming European cardiovascular health plan.
Okay, well, it's very difficult to follow both Mafalda and Marius, but I will try. We've talked about the importance of personalized diagnosis and personalized management. But in Perfecto, we're looking at personalized communication. So a lot of the countries, when they try to roll out screening programs, find challenges with the populations deeming those programs both acceptable and actionable. And this is one of the things that Perfecto is looking. So we're addressing those societal and behavioral barriers towards screening uptake by developing personalized communication models that take into account the barriers and the facilitators that we've identified as part of the Perfecto methodology in Cyprus and Romania. And that information is feeding back in a loop in the personalized communication models so that the health message is tailored towards diverse populations. And models like that are grounded in behavioral science and social innovation are essential in trying to effectively engage diverse populations across Europe. And we've done that in Cyprus and in Romania. So this kind of evidence-based and citizen-centered, because this is obviously coordinated by a patient organization, so it is co-designed with the patients and the citizens. So this kind of citizen-centered approach that is based on evidence can support member states when drafting tailored, effective screening policies that can that are aligned with the goals of the cardiovascular health plan to reduce cardiovascular disease burden, enhance equity in health, and support competitive and sustainable healthcare systems. And we've heard about the cost effectiveness of early screening and diagnosis. So the Cyprus upcoming presidency, I think it's an opportunity for Cyprus to leverage the evidence, but also the expert collaborative network from projects like Perfecto, FH Early, and PERMET to advocate for harmonized, effective screening strategies that will benefit such a large number of European citizens and make cardiovascular prevention a true cornerstone of, like MEP Jerkovic said, a healthy first and then competitive Europe. And it's especially relevant as the Cyprus Ministry of Health has just announced this week on Monday the National Strategy on Cardiovascular Disease, which is a very positive step forward, showing dedication for the cardiovascular health.
Thank you very much, Professor Panayotou. And on that hopeful note, I thank you for the discussion in this panel. And as we are coming to a close of this event, I am delighted to invite for closing remarks our co-hosts, MEP Romana Jerkovic, along Magdalena Dacor.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your participation. Everything I heard today moved me profoundly, and I was especially moved by the stories of these wonderful, brave young people, Lena Rosa and Aidan and Joanna and Tevi. You are the true heart of all this. And it is your courage and your passion that fuel our and mine commitment to change. And you remind us why we are all here, why we need a strong cardiovascular plan, and why we cannot give up. Magdalena, I echo your worries. Yes, it's true. It's a problem that nothing has been done in the past decade. But, let's not lose the hope. Now we have a historic opportunity, as we had with the European Beating Cancer Plan. And this opportunity, of course, is called Cardiovascular Health Plan strategy. So I think that nothing can stop us now, really. So let us leave this room not only inspired, but also determined. Determined to make cardiovascular health plan a true European priority, and to prove that prevention is indeed the best, the smartest policy that we could have. And the road ahead is challenging, but it's always. So let's stay united, I would say. Let's stay united to and believing that lives will be saved. I will not say that can be saved, that will be saved, and that families will be protected, and that the future, our new generation, will be secured. We must be united for that important vision and goal. Thank you so much once again. Thank you.
MEP Jerkovic, thank you so much for having us. As you can tell, we are not the ones to be easily get rid of. Even though we are half an hour over the program, we're here to demonstrate our commitment We're serious about it. We're serious to collaborate and take every opportunity to maximize, because as you said, we can no longer wait. I don't want to hold you up anymore because it's late. And I was thinking, what would be the smartest way to say after everyone's amazing interventions? And unfortunately, I don't have anything smart other than that we're here to collaborate. We want to work with you and people like you to change the future for Lena Rosa, Aiden, Joanna, Tevi, and 90 million European citizens who are awaiting change. Be the torchbearer, exercise your power. As the chair of the Cardiovascular Health MEP group, as the co-chair of the SANT committee, we count on you and people like yourself to put it and use the soft powers and add the powers that you have to influence the cardiovascular health plan. With that, once again, chwala, thank you so much. And thank you for all of you who actually stayed and showed the commitment to be with us. We cannot wait another 10 years. Thank you.